Well, welcome everybody to Conscious Cafe Global. My name's Gina Lazenby and I'm here this morning with Lynne MacTaggart. Morning, Lynne.
Good morning.
I'm
Nice to
saying
be
good
with you,
morning
Gina.
because it's it's where we are. You're in London, I'm in Skipton, but we have people in other time zones. So wherever you are in the world, welcome. And also if you're listening to this later on. Conscious Cafe is, I think quite a few of you are members of Conscious Cafe, but if you're not and you found your way here this morning, Conscious Cafe is an organisation that was started by ex-publisher Judy Piatkos. She started in 2011, and the idea was to bring people together in community for conversations about things that mattered and create connection and raise consciousness, and that's what she's been doing at her base in London. And a few of us really enjoyed that, and so we've started our own Conscious Cafe groups, and we now have them in Oundle, New Forest, Canterbury, Newbury, St Albans, and now in en masse in France, in Geneva and Singapore, and they're in a completely different time zone. It'll be evening in Singapore, so we are global. This is the second time actually, Lynne, that we've had a global conversation, because normally our speakers, if we have a speaker at a gathering, are physical events, and we're here physically, virtually, aren't we, this morning. And I'm going to, just before I welcome Lynne, I'm going to talk about timing. So Lynne, you're going to talk about, once I've introduced you, about 40 minutes or so. If you need me during that time, just wave. We've got the place where people can put questions. So after that, people can put their questions in there in the chat, and then we can take those and go on till about 12:15. And if we have more questions, then we would have our final end time at 12:30. And at the end of all this, because we're talking about the power of 8 groups, I have everybody's email address, so I can email the recording link and I can email instructions for how people move on further. Because if we're going to be talking about developing groups and we're inside Conscious Cafe communities, a Conscious Cafe leader can do that. But if somebody wants to be involved in something, then we'll signpost them to, and also you've got lots of resources as well. So we'll collate those at the end and I'll do an email. So Lynne, I mean, you are definitely a woman who needs no introduction, but I am going to introduce you because I hate it when people say that, because I'm sure a lot of people on this call have seen your books or read your books. And here we go, look. I've certainly read your first book, The Field, but look, I've got The Bond here. And look, I have all here, I've loved it. Look, absolutely love that.
Wonderful.
I mean, we first connected, I think, in the early 90s through What Doctors Don't Tell You and my feng shui school. And this is, you've definitely done this in the last 10 years. But connecting through the space between us, I mean, that excited me because of my work in feng shui. And here, now, interestingly, you're involved with all this synchronicity and miracles. Do you remember? In 2008, I was in Los Angeles and I was in a friend's home telling her about you. And at the same moment I'm talking about you, in through her letterbox, I can even hear the sound in my mind now, pops this leaflet for your program, your course, which you actually refer to in here, the early days of developing programs. It came through the letterbox and I went, oh, how amazing is that? And I sent a photograph to you. It's interesting, isn't it? The miracles and synchronicities that we can create. And so it was just the other week that your Get Well program, you provided a really fascinating webinar for what's happening now. And you were talking about the power of 8. And I, having been to your book launch some time ago, I thought, this is so timely now, because we're all holding really big emotions and feelings and questions personally, and about our work and about our jobs and the world. I mean, there is no time in history when this is all coming together in such a way, and it's quite a lot to handle. So, you know, even if many of us are feeling that we're really thriving, I mean, I'm sure we're going up and down, but looking to the future, I suppose some people might feel a sense of powerlessness, but as you're going to tell us, we have immense power within, and we have immense power when we come together as a group. And that's why I thought it'd be fantastic for you to talk about that this morning. And I am recording. I'm going to hand over to you. And if we were in a room, Lynne, we would give you applause. So here we go. We're going to send you love and applause.
I'm hearing it, that virtual applause, Gina, no problem. Wonderful, wonderful. So I would like to talk to you a bit about how I came across all of this and how this all happened bit by bit. So to do that, I need to share my screen with you, and I want to share a little PowerPoint. So I want to talk about the power of 8, but also how I kind of segued into all of this by accident. So I have to admit something. You know, I'm sort of the queen of intention at the moment, but I have to admit that way back in the early part of 2000s and before, I didn't believe any of this. I didn't believe in the power of intention. You know, I have a background as an investigative reporter. You know, many people know me in the work of science and spirituality and how that meets. But my background is in, you know, trying to put baby sellers in jail through heavy duty investigations. That's what I started out doing when I was in my 20s. So that kind of hard-nosed journalism has never left me. It's certainly what we engage in with our magazine, What Doctors Don't Tell You, and it's even behind a lot of the work I do with spirituality. So I kept hearing about a lot of this stuff about manifestation and, you know, The Secret, etc., believe and receive. And I said to myself, and I'd even seen it after I wrote this book called The Field, I found that we were in the midst of a new science in the process of being created. And there was a lot of evidence demonstrating that thoughts are an actual something with the capacity to change physical matter. So I wanted to find out what we're really talking about here. You know, what are we talking about? Are we talking about just shifting a little quantum particle, or are we talking about curing cancer with our thoughts? So I thought, okay, I'm going to test this. And I thought, I know a lot of scientists who are working in consciousness research. And I also have a lot of readers, because by then the field was in 30 languages. So I thought, well, if I just put them together, I'll have the biggest global laboratory in the world. And that's what I did back in 2007. I thought, let's test it. And I got to be honest with you, I didn't think it was going to work. You know, my editor thought it was going to work more than I did, because we did a book called The Intention Experiment, which was an invitation as well as an explanation of all the science of intention. It was an invitation to take part in this giant global experiment. So we started small. I say, I didn't think it was going to work. I started with Dr. Gary Schwartz, a noted psychologist at the University of Arizona. And in every instance of our 33 experiments, by the way, we've worked with credible, prestigious scientists working at A-class universities. And by the way, we've done 33 experiments to date, everything from trying to make seeds grow faster to water, to trying to purify water, to trying to lower violence in war-torn areas, and even healing someone of post-traumatic stress disorder. And of those 33 experiments, 29 have shown measurable, positive, mostly significant effects. So it didn't just work, it really worked. It's worked better than most drug studies, most pharmaceutical drug studies. So we did stuff like this. We would set up intentions for seeds, for instance, and the scientists would create 4 sets of seeds. So we'd have 1 target seeds and 3 controls. And he'd photograph all 4 sets of seeds. He'd send me the photographs. And then if I was speaking somewhere around the world, I would let my audience randomly choose one of the groups, wouldn't tell the scientists which ones we were doing. We'd send intention to it. Let's say it was group A. We'd send this very specific intention to make these seeds sprout faster, essentially. And then we'd tell the scientists we were done when we did our intention stuff, and they'd plant all 4 sets of seeds, still wouldn't know which ones we'd sent intention to, and then measure them after 4 days. And I did this experiment 6 times with them. From Sydney, Australia, with an audience of 700, New York with an audience of 100, Dallas, Texas, South Carolina, Los Angeles, and with thousands of people doing an intention over the internet on my site. Every single time, the seeds set intention grew significantly higher than the controls. Let's just look at this for a second, by the way. And we moved on to things like clean water experiments, et cetera, and we lowered water by 1 pH in one experiment. We raised it by 1 pH in another experiment. But let's unpack this for a second. Think about my seed experiment, okay? Let's go back to that one. The first time I did it, I was in Sydney, Australia, in an audience of 700. The seeds were sitting in a lab in Tucson, Arizona. They were 8,000 miles away. And we weren't sending intention to the actual seeds themselves. We were sending intention to a photo of the seeds. So that gave me a clue that we were creating some sort of psychic internet. Now, when we started moving on to water experiments, we even did a live experiment in Lake Biwa. And we took samples of the water. It's a very polluted lake in Japan. I worked on this with the late Masaru Emoto. And we were able to move the seeds by a whole pH. So all of this is cool, really amazing, but not the point of this story. The point of my story really started in Chicago back in 2008. And this was just before the workshop that Gina says her friend received a leaflet for. We decided we were going to do workshops. But at that point, in 2008, I hadn't run loads of workshops before. And I was also trying to figure out, how can I scale down what I'm doing to a workshop setting? You know, how can I take these giant intention experiments and make them small? So I'm kicking it around with my husband, Brian Hubbard, one night. And I say to him, I don't know, maybe I'll just put people in groups of 8 or so and have them send intention to one of the members of the group with a health challenge. And my husband says, he's a great headline writer, also a journalist, and he goes, I love it, the power of 8. And honestly, that's how it started, by total accident. We put people in groups of 8 or so. We had them send intention to a member of the group with a health challenge. We figured it was just going to be a feel-good effect, you know, like getting your back massaged or something like that. We asked them to come back the next day and for all of the receivers to report on what was going on. It was not a feel-good effect. This is the kind of stuff that happened. And by the way, this is what we were doing. It was a group like this, you know, groups like this. That's what happened. It was essentially the lame that were walking. We had stuff like this. We had somebody with insomnia who said, I don't have insomnia anymore. I haven't been able to sleep for years and years, and I had a good night's sleep last night. We had somebody who was walking with a terrible limp, who had terrible knee pain and arthritis in her knee, and said, I'm walking normally today. We had somebody with terrible migraines who said, my head is clear today. We had somebody else with IBS who said, my gut is clear. But somebody else said, I suffer from depression and it feels like it's lifted today. So we're basically saying to ourselves what our 23-year-old daughter says, which is WTF. You know, what is going on here, essentially? And I actually didn't believe it. I thought, oh, well, this is just a placebo effect. Until I started doing these groups around the world. And I kept doing it and doing it and doing it to try to understand what on earth was going on. And no matter where I did it, and I was speaking around the world, this is a group in Abu Dhabi, the same thing happened. For instance, in a workshop I held not long ago at Mile High Church in Denver, I put the audience into groups and had them send healing intention to a member of the group with a health challenge. This was just a keynote speech I was giving one night. And this kind of stuff happened. We had Linda, who reversed stage 4 lung cancer. We had Natalie, who had an intention for a family business, and it completely turned around after that 10 minutes intention. We had Connie, who had terrible TMJ pain, the kind of temporomandibular joint pain in her jaw, and that was erased. We had Sandy, who was due to have a knee replacement because she couldn't even stand on her knee, and it reversed. We have Beverly, who healed her dislocated shoulder, and she had just had an accident, and she actually felt her shoulder shifting into place. We had Joan, who had eye damage. She couldn't see, she couldn't focus normally after her stroke, and it was healed. We had Faith, whose back pain dissipated, even though she did not believe in any of this. She was skeptical coming into this evening talk, and her back pain disappeared. So I saw this over and over and over again. One of the most amazing ones was recently at a talk I was giving at a conference last summer, where a woman was paralyzed from her neck down. A woman in her early 20s, idiopathic paralysis. Doctors didn't understand it. Very sad because she's a dancer. And again, we did this intention for all of the groups. I put people in the audience into groups. Her group decided to intend for her. And at the end, when I usually ask people to report back, and did anyone feel anything? She got out of her wheelchair and stood up. And the entire audience was flooded with tears. And it was just extraordinary, but the kind of extraordinary stuff I see all the time, and not after years of practice in 10 minutes. So I still didn't understand what was going on here until one of the recipients said, I felt like I was giving and receiving healing, like I was healing myself. This was actually one of the senders. They felt a two-way flow, and that started giving me some clues. So I was pretty frightened about this because, as I say, I'm a hard-nosed reporter. I'm not a healer. And I suddenly wondered, what on earth have I stumbled onto? And so, this was back in 2008. It took me 10 years to get up the courage to finally publish a book about it, because I needed to understand why. So after all of this, I went back to the intention experiments to try to understand a bit more. And I was pretty sick of seeds and water and leaves. And I thought, let's do something huge. I started doing peace intention experiments. I've done 7 of them to date. And the first one was on Sri Lanka, when it was in the middle of a civil war. But I want to tell you, and we had an amazing effect. We've done 7, we've had effects in all 7. I want to tell you a bit about just one, a recent one we did to heal the most violent place in America. We chose the official most violent place in America is a part of St. Louis, Missouri. That's the kind of real estate it's got. It's got the kind of place where you go out, like one guy, Brandon, did just to get a 6-pack of beer, and he gets shot dead by someone who was actually his protege, because the protege knew he was carrying cash from a tax rebate in his pocket. It's that kind of place. So the most dangerous place is a place called Fairground. So we did intention for Fairground. And then I had a professor of statistics from the University of California do a complex analysis looking at what had happened for 3 years before to St. Louis as a whole, and Fairground in particular, in crime, violent crime and property crime, before and afterwards. So 3 years before, 6 months afterward. The trajectory of all crime had been going up, violent crime and property crime. And it continued to go up with St. Louis as a whole, St. Louis property crime as a whole, Fairground property crime as a whole went up. But Fairground violent crime, the object of our intention, went down 43%. Very interesting. Not the point of my story, though. The point of my story is what was going on with the participants, because I survey participants in all my big intention experiments, and I started noticing something from 2008 when we did our first peace intention experiment. Not only were the targets occurring, we were shifting something in the targets, it would seem. Now, we have to say, by the way, with war, with violent crime, etc., it's subject to a lot of variables. You know, did we do this? You know, we asked that a lot in the first time. It could have been lots of other variables. However, when you start seeing the same thing going on time after time, and we've done it 7 times, every single time violence in some way has been lowered, it starts getting interesting. But here's what's really interesting is what was going on with the participants. They were sending out intention for peace. Their lives were becoming more peaceful. They reported being closer to loved ones, making up with estranged relatives, having a new life purpose, having a more peaceful life, getting along better with their bosses and their coworkers. But most particularly, about half of them said they were closer to everyone we came into contact with. They were hugging strangers. So I'm thinking to myself, what on earth is going on here? Maybe there is a mirror effect here. So I started getting interested in scaling this down. I was seeing all of these effects in the big intention experiments and the little power of 8 groups. So the journalist in me said, I got to study this. So I set up my first year-long power of 8 masterclass because I said, okay, I'll get some people and I'll study them. I'll see month by month what's going on with them. So we did. And we set up the first one and we had amazing situations. That's Mitchell Dean. He's asked for anonymity because he's a clinical psychologist who suffered most of his life from terrible clinical depression. That's not a good fit for a psychologist. So he tried everything, being an integrative psychologist, every kind of everything, and he couldn't shift this depression. And then he started working on a Power of 8 group. And he had his group intend for him that he would find the source of this depression. And suddenly he got a kind of inkling that he should go talk to a Chinese herbalist. And he did, and the herbalist said, I want to check your liver filtration systems. And he said, he found out after a test that one of them wasn't working. They fixed that, and this lifelong clinical depression lifts. So we were having this kind of amazing success with so many people, but not everybody. There was Andy, for instance. Now, Andy was and is a very talented marketer and coach. And she was going through a divorce. She had 2 young kids, and she needed to support. She had sold her gift store business, and she needed a new source of income. So her group's intending for her, and nothing. She can't get anything. And she's talented, she's smart, she's capable, she's young, can't get anything. So we talked to her, and finally in this masterclass, I finally say, okay, Andy, get off of yourself. Stop intending for yourself, intend for someone else. And I had a particular someone else in mind. A young boy called Luke, who was 15 at the time, and in a fit of adolescent angst, he'd broken up with his first serious girlfriend, so he threw himself off a 40-foot structure onto hard ground. Now, I heard about this from Luke's stepfather, who asked us to do an intention for Luke, because Luke had broken everything in his body. That's Luke after his fall. And so we set up a healing visual with my masterclass, and we sent successive intentions for 3 successive Sundays, while his stepfather kept a running commentary about exactly what was happening. And it was amazing. Just the times we were setting intention, Luke rallied in so many ways. Here, I thought I had pictures here. Well, hold on one second. Luke, a few weeks later, was whizzing around in his wheelchair. A short time after that, he was with his buddies on his birthday, and back on his devices, so you know he's a lot better. And within a few weeks after that, he defied every prognosis. They didn't even think he was going to live. He was home, safe and sound, and he's now a healthy 18-year-old. Now, did we do this? Maybe this was just good doctoring. But what I do know is it wasn't a placebo effect, because Luke, like any 15-year-old, thinks his parents' beliefs are stupid, particularly their beliefs in the power of 8, the power of intention. So as soon as we did this, and this is the more interesting part of the story, the more interesting part of the story is not just what happened to Luke, but what happened to Andy. Andy, within the next week, a couple of days after doing her first intention, Andy gets a call out of nowhere from someone she doesn't even know, offering her what turns out to be her dream job. So this kind of thing happened over and over again. It gave me more clues about the power of altruism and how altruism is a key here to this whole process. As I mentioned before, there is some sort of intention mirror effect going on in the large and the small groups. But the big piece here is the power of altruism. And I've seen this in so many studies. I started looking into the science of altruism. Altruism is like a bulletproof vest. People who do altruistic things, no matter how small, are healthier, happier, live longer lives in every regard. People who lend a helping hand, for instance, are 42% more likely to be happy, according to one study. Volunteers, they've done studies on them. They've found that their death rates are 2/3 lower. They're far healthier and physically more active, half as likely to be depressed. It's really amazing. And even if you have an illness, when you get off of yourself, it's really powerful. When you help someone else with the same condition, you're more likely to get healed. Really interesting study about this. It was done by a psychologist who's also a priest, who got together 400 people suffering from clinical depression. He wanted to see whether prayer could help people with mental illness, because there's certainly plenty of studies looking at its effects on people with physical illness and showing it has a positive effect. So he divided them into 2 groups. One group was to get the prayer, and the other group was to give the prayer. And he then measured through a whole bunch of parameters how well they were doing, whether their depression was improved in any way. And he found that people who got the prayer did well, but not nearly as well as those who had given the prayer. Their effects were off the charts. And that's what occurs over and over and over again. Community and giving. You're more likely to heal if you're the one doing the helping. And that started making sense to me, because I saw this so much in our Power of 8 groups. It wasn't just the recipients that were getting healed, but the senders. We had a guy called Wes. Now, Wes had a really tragic life. He had been studying to be a biochemist or a doctor at university. And in his 3rd year, this is during the time of the Vietnam War, he got called up to go serve in the war. Now, this was at the point where the end of the war, when college deferments no longer applied. So he had to go, and he was on the front line. And the whole situation with it was so debilitating and traumatic that he came home deeply depressed, didn't finish university, and his life continued in a terrible downward spiral like that. Even finding the love of his life, his second wife, didn't last that long, because she had a fast-growing cancer, and she died. And he was left, he's American, he was left with terrible, terrible medical bills. He had to pay off by selling his house and living in his truck, and doing long distance trucking for years. So by the time I met him, just at a Power of 8 group I'd set up, he was deeply depressed. He couldn't even get up in the morning. So he was going to put himself forward with this Power of 8 group. This is the first time he did it, never done it before. But he thought there was a woman in there with cancer, so he thought, no, she's more deserving. So he did it. And he had an extraordinary mystical experience. Both the next day, suddenly it was like the grass was greener than it ever had been, the flowers smelled better. But even that night, the second night after it, he had an amazing, almost lucid dream where he met his 19-year-old self back at his college campus. And somehow that 19-year-old conveyed to him, there's still time. And it was almost thereafter, like Scrooge waking up on Christmas morning. He was a completely transformed person. He was running around suddenly saying hello to people, rejoined his church with vigor, joined Power of 8 groups. He's now power walking 90 minutes. He's started doing study and writing. He's like a new person. And that was all about just giving in a Power of 8 group. It was amazing. So I wanted to find out how this could be, why we have this situation. How can these transformations be? And I was really fascinated, and one clue came from the work of a guy called Dacher Keltner. He's at the University of California at Berkeley. He's done a lot of work on a thing called the vagus nerve. It's one of the longest nerves in our body, and it starts from the neck and it winds through all the major organs of our body. And when we do something compassionate for someone else, it gets turned on. And it not only makes us feel better, it's almost like endorphins that we get, a helper's high, as they like to call it, but it also makes us feel more connected with people we're not like. So it's a real powerful way of creating a kind of sense of oneness. And that's what I ultimately found was the key to the whole thing here, the power of oneness. Some of the things that I heard on the intention experiment when I started doing these feedback forms were things like this. When people were part of the intention experiment, they would say things like, it's as if my brain is wired to a higher network. And we got stuff like this. I felt like I'd stepped into a palpable stream of energy along my arms and hands. Remember, everyone, in the main, when we were doing intention experiments, people joined from, like you're joining today, virtually. They're joining virtually and they're coming onto my website, and yet they have this palpable stream of energy, even though they're sitting alone on their computers. My whole body was tingling. I was having goosebumps. I felt a strong current in my body. It was like a solid magnetic force field all around me. Sort of like what I imagine it would be like to be locked in a tractor beam, like in Star Trek. It stopped soon after the experiment. Once again, I'm thinking to myself, WTF, what on earth is going on here? But people reporting with the Power of 8 groups also talked about a kind of feeling of transformation. They reported things like this. One of them, who was part of a Power of 8 group afterwards, said there was this light, a ball of light, a light being of sorts, as if they were the magnifiers and they were behind us and their energy was coming through us. Sandy, the woman who I said was due for a knee replacement, she reported afterward that during the 10 minutes, it was as if someone with big mitts was holding my leg. Other people have said Kundalini type energy poured out into the floor through my arm. Someone else said the grass was intensely green. The flowers have never smelt so sweet. Someone else said it charged my spiritual battery. Clearly, people entered some sort of altered state. So again, the journalist in me needed to find out why. And I was very fortunate. I had spoken at a place called Life University, which is the largest chiropractic university in the world, in America, in Atlanta. And they were so intrigued by my Power of 8 work, they offered to put their neuroscience department at my disposal. So we did a series of experiments using students as volunteers to set up Power of 8 groups while we measured the effects on their brainwaves. So we put EEG caps on one member of each group that we formed to find out what happened. And we found very quickly, there were huge changes from before and afterward. A very big quieting of lots of parts of the brain. Essentially, parts of the frontal lobes and parts of a thing called the parietal lobes. They sit right back here. They are, there you go. They sit back in the brain, and what they do is they help us navigate through space. They tell us, this is me, this is not me. Now, they were dialed way down, as were parts of the frontal lobes involved with worry, doubt, negativity, dialed way down. So what we were looking at were people in a state of ecstatic oneness. They did not, these brainwave signatures did not, hold on one second, they did not resemble the brainwaves of meditators, but much more the brainwave signatures of people like Buddhist monks in ecstatic prayer and Sufi masters during chanting, as measured by Dr. Andrew Newberg at the University of Pennsylvania. He's done studies of them, and our brainwave signatures of our Power of Eight groups were virtually identical. So these were much more the brainwave signatures measured by the psychologist Abraham Maslow when he studied what he called peak experiences, which are mystical experiences. And they found exactly the same: profound physical experiences, visualizations, senses altered just like my people, no sense of the physical, and a kind of sense of inner knowing, an epiphany, which happened to so many people doing these Power of Eight groups. Now, what is really powerful about all of this is the sense of connection going on, where you are able to transcend your sense of individuality and enter a place of oneness. And that's the place where miracles happen. And during this COVID-19 crisis, this is a brilliant way for people to overcome social isolation. What I've been suggesting to many, many people is to do what we've been doing anyway. I do virtual Power of Eight groups. I have thousands and thousands of groups around the world, and they work just as well as groups when you're dealing with things individually. So, and if you have them, they work just as well as if you are individual groups and you're meeting physically. So you don't need to meet physically in order to experience these kinds of amazing transformations. My master class never does that I run virtually. We have, hundreds of groups who take part, and people are meeting virtually and experiencing this amazing power of oneness, not only to heal them, but heal each other, but also to experience this extraordinary sense of connection. It's like they found their intention family. So I want to just hold on one second. I'm just missing, I just had a click on.
Are you showing a PowerPoint now? Because we're just seeing you speaking.
Yep, no, I'm putting it back on again.
Okay, I thought so.
I just want to, before I finish, I just want to show you a few things about what I'm doing. So a lot of my material and more, and also about how to set up your own Power of Eight group, is in my book, The Power of Eight. I really urge you to get hold of it if you're interested. Also, if you don't know much about me, as Gina said, I've done 3 other books in this area, the field, which is the overview of all of the science, the new science, and the new science, which is redefining who we are and how we're supposed to live. And the intention experiment, the science of intention, all the science of intention, and how miraculous we are. And finally, the power of connection with the bond. I wanted to answer the question, okay, if this science is is redefining who we are. Well, how are we supposed to live? And that was what the bond was all about. I also want to let you know I'm doing a podcast and soon to do a regular webcast, Living the New Science. So check that out. I have a number of people who are, and a number of podcasts already. You can see it on my website, lynnmactaggart.com/podcast. And also, if you sign up to my community, we are running some big intentions experiments, and I'm working on a big one now that will help to heal polarization. I've also been doing Facebook Live intentions every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 noon Eastern, 5 p.m. UK, 6 p.m. Europe, where I do live intention experiments for healing us from COVID-19 in every way, both lowering the incidence of it, overcoming our fear, doing all of those kinds of things to try to help people be confident in the future and not just fearful about what's going on now. I think it's really, and I've also been doing intentions for people to come to an understanding and a realization of their place in helping to make things better, that this isn't just a crisis, it's an opportunity for us to make things better, to do things better. And I help people try to find their place within it. You can still get recordings to our 4-part COVID-19 talks where we did webinars to help supercharge yourself against coronavirus. And we talked with a number of top doctors who have a whole recipe of ways to prevent the illness in yourself, to maximize your immune system. We interviewed some people and had them show us moves, simple moves you can make, simple exercises and yoga moves that actually prime your immune system too and improve your immune system. So that's on my other website, getwell.solutions. And just check that out. It's totally free. There's no upsell. We only suggest, if you liked it, that you donate some money to charity, but it's totally free for everyone. It was our service during this time. And you can set up a virtual Power of 8 group. I know all of you have Conscious Cafe groups. If you want to set up more in your time zone, I have a Facebook group, Connecting and Healing Through the Power of 8. It's just free for everyone to join. And what people do is they advertise their time zone and just say, hey, anyone else want to join a group? And I really encourage you as well to have strangers in your group, because it's really interesting what ends up happening. People, through the Power of 8, get amazingly connected. And finally, I do a master class every year, once a year. It kicks off in February. And if you check out everything I'm doing on lynnmactaggart.com and you're interested in actually diving very deeply, this is Super Intention Boot Camp for an entire year. You can check it out. So there's my website, lynnmactaggart.com. And it's been great to share this with you. And I look forward to answering some questions now.
Wonderful, Lynn. Wonderful. I mean, the resources that you have are staggering. They have been for years, but what you've got now are amazing. And people can easily just Google Lynne MacTaggart, they'll find you. But I'll also send the links for the talks as well, because you sign up on the other side. I found them immensely helpful. I think one of the questions is, well, I saw a question about, is there an effect of having more groups in the room? You've got a Power of 8 group working and you had more than one.
No. Everybody thinks this. They think, oh, bigger is better. And one of the things that I discovered doing the intention experiments that were so helpful is that with that seed experiment, for instance, we ran it 6 times, as I mentioned, and there were varying sized groups. I had 700 one time. I had a small group of 100. I had, thousands over the internet, and it made no difference. The seeds that were sent intention grew significantly higher than controls. The only thing that made a difference was the best result we had was from a group in South Carolina of healing touch practitioners who are very used to the power of intention. And so when they did it, we had a slightly higher effect. And so I think experience counts, but I don't think size matters. It doesn't supersize. I know there is the whole Maharishi effect theory, which is what it is. It's a theory that the square root of 1% is necessary in order to, meditators, in order to change the planet. It's just a theory. What they have demonstrated with the TM studies is when there's a group of meditators, this critical mass of meditators, the crime rate seems to go down. That's what they've shown. But meditation, what they're talking about is a passive activity of meditation, of quietude. And as we demonstrated in our own brainwave studies, the act of meditation has a very different brainwave signature than the Power of 8 groups. Ours are very much like a losing of the self and an entering a space of oneness with the group. That is not the case with meditation. It does create brainwave changes, but there is still essentially a sense of self.
Can you just outline and explain, I think few people are asking this, to go from don't know anything to love to be in a group of 8, what's the run up to then being in that space where you're feeling and you're sending energy? What is a time scale of the learning process for that?
Yeah, let me give you an idea about, I mean, it's hard to go through all of the process of how to do intention. So let me give you some broad strokes, and I really encourage you to read the book because it's got all of the instructions. But what I can do is talk to you about how do you set up a group. Well, you have conscious cafe groups already. So you've got your group. Does it have to be 8? No, it doesn't. You heard how it started. It was a figure I plucked out of the air. Maybe not. Maybe it was the universe doing this, but it wasn't any sacred geometry. It was just, hey, we'll put people in groups of 8. What I've noticed over the years of doing this with thousands and thousands of groups is that 5 works, 12 works. 8 is a nice Goldilocks figure, but it's not necessary to have just 8. So don't worry about that. Get your people together. Have somebody be a leader. So somebody run the group. One of the things that I find that people have the most difficulty with is formulating an intention. People have terrible trouble with this. Even people, I'm running a master class now, so it's my year-long course, and we're about 4 months into it. And people are still asking very, very specific things. They're saying, well, what if I intend to win the lottery? And I will say things like, and they say, well, we'd like to do that for the whole group. And I say, oh, you would? Does everybody need this 33 million? And they say, no. John needs $20,000 for his car, and Joan needs $12,000 for her child's tuition. I say, oh, so why don't you just request what you need? I mean, what the universe really wants you to be is specific. And one of the things I really discourage people from doing is, if you're going to run a Power of 8 group, then find out how I do it. A lot of people try to tack on a lot of different stuff. And I'm a very conservative journalist. I know what has worked. What I don't know is what happens if you tack on somebody else's modality. Their modality may work, but if you start throwing in reconnective healing or Reiki or whatever, I don't know, and I can't vouch for how it's going to work. And I don't like to promote anything that I don't know. And also it will, if you say, oh, it didn't work, well, then it kind of impacts on the Power of 8. So I would just recommend that you stay with the very simple processes that we go with. And they are essentially to get yourself into a state of oneness by just starting out breathing together. You don't need white light. You don't need purple flames. You don't need any of that stuff. You just need to get together, formulate an intention. One person runs it, and you take some deep breaths. As I say, read more about how to do a system I call Power of 8 through the book, The Power of 8, and powering up is the system that is all about the right heart state, mind state, etc. It requires a great degree of focus. It requires a heart state. The recipient just opens up their heart to receive. So you have to go through certain processes to get yourself into that state. It's only a few minutes. And then you hold that intention. You allow yourself to visualize. You allow yourself to feel the connection with the people, even though it's virtual. You'll feel it, believe me. And we only do 10 minutes. And the reason we only do 10 minutes is because the first time we did an intention experiment back in 2007, when I was talking to Dr. Schwartz, Dr. Gary Schwartz, and we were planning this, we were going to launch it with an audience I had in London of about 400 or 500. And I said to him, well, how long should we do it? And he said, well, how long do you think people can hold a focus? And we thought, well, some of the people will never have meditated before, so maybe 10 minutes. And we did 10 minutes and it worked. We had a big effect. And with all of the intention experiments, we've only had people hold it for 10 minutes because of that reason, and it's worked. So I started doing that in Power of 8 groups, and it worked. So part of the thing about the Power of 8 is I tried to build it on knowledge and science and the things that were working, kind of dictated to us what's the procedure. And the same thing with the intention experiment. All of the system that I have powering up, I call it, is a kind of a amalgamation of the best techniques that have worked in scientific studies and the best techniques that have worked with people in different disciplines using intention techniques. So I interviewed a lot of Qigong masters and Buddhist monks and master healers to find out some of their technique. Now, some of it is diverse, but there's also a lot of commonalities. So I tried to take a lot of the commonalities and distill them into a simple format that people can use. The powering up system is really explained in detail in my book, The Intention Experiment. But it has a lot of, it's a distillation, as I say, of techniques. But I'll tell you just one thing that's important. Tell the universe what you want. Don't be afraid to say cancer or something negative. That's a big urban myth. Oh, you can't use in intention a negative word. Well, if you don't tell the universe that you want to be free of cancer, well, how is it going to know? And just frame it positively. Be free of cancer.
So in the book, you do mention quite a lot of stories. I mean, you mentioned about people and their finances, as people have said, what about loneliness? What about examples? But what it seems I'm hearing, and you can verify, is that you can ask for anything. It doesn't have to be healing. It doesn't have to be money. It could be opportunity. You mentioned about people's businesses, and that's what people are asking examples. So it's anything really. You just
anything, and they'll see in the book that what I tend to do with my master class is I have people intending, I suggest they intend for whether it's their health, their relationships, their business, their finances, their career, their hobbies, even their life's purpose. You can do anything like that. And we've recorded all kinds of successes in all of those areas.
Okay. And if you're talking about 10 minutes where the group is gathered together to have the intention that one person is put forward, and they're separate, so there's no hands on at all. They're all separate in their separate Zoom. Is that enough for one session, or would you then do another 10 minutes on another intention if you're having people?
That's up to the group.
Okay.
That's up to the group and
no
how long they're
about
going
that.
to meet. Don't try, there are no set rules. I wouldn't try to do all the members of the group in one session.
Okay.
And remember too, there's a mirror effect. Even if it's not your turn, you're going to get something out of it. And oftentimes you get most of it out of, many of our more interesting successes happened when people were senders, not receivers.
So if you're, because somebody's pointed out about having a conscious intention, having unconscious intentions, and is there any potential conflict there?
That's a big subject, and I do a whole course on that.
Right.
I mean, there's techniques of getting rid of all of that, but it's a big subject. And yeah, it usually is, you know, oftentimes when people, their intentions aren't working, it has a lot to do with sabotaging themselves.
Okay, but so what was the level we're talking at now? We're talking about have a conscious intention stated specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very specifically, you know, what do you want? Tell the universe what you want.
So you're telling
And
the
when
universe,
you want it, and when you want it,
okay,
you know?
timing as well.
Yeah, give them detail, give the universe detail.
Okay.
Don't be afraid, and don't ask for, as I say, don't ask for generalities like,
Okay.
you know, I want world peace. No. I want a lowering of violence, or say a lowering of violence by 10% in X neighborhood. You know, ask for very specific stuff. Tell the universe what you want. And oftentimes people ask for things like, I want to be rich, as I say, going back to that. They don't really mean they want to be rich. What they mean is, I want another job. I hate my current job. Or I want more time. I want more time for my hobbies or my children or my grandchildren. They don't necessarily want more stuff, you know, more wealth, more things in the bank. They want something else, or to be free of debt. So tell the universe what you want. Exactly. And also tell the universe what you need. Because my experience is with people in my master class, they have these incredible windfalls. And it almost always is exactly what they needed. You know, if they were in debt by 2,300, that's the money that showed up.
Well, then I've taken a photograph of it, because when I was talking to Judy about how many people, I said, well, it'd be great if we had 80. And I took a photograph when it said 80 participants.
Great. Perfect. 10 groups of 8. Great.
I should have said more, but just 80 came to me, and then I saw it, and I thought that's my intention. I should have.
That was your intention. That's brilliant, Gina. There you go. There you go.
So the mirror effect. If we're sitting in a group and you're intending for that person's stated intention, and then the mirror effect is coming back, where is your own personal intention sitting if you're intending on their intention?
No, your intention is on them. You're not intending for yourself at all. There's no mirror effect that you go, oh, okay, my turn. Okay. The reason that it works is that you totally get off of yourself. Understand that altruism isn't giving to get. Altruism, when you enter that state of pure wanting to help that other person, that's the miracle zone. Not, oh yeah, now it's my turn. Now it's going to rebound back onto me.
Yeah. Does the person receiving the benefit of the intention need to be inside the Power of 8 group? Or can you have the intention for others, like the community mentioned in the US? So I think you've answered that. So you could have the 8 people intend for...
Yeah, like we did for Luke. Remember Luke, the story of the young boy? We intended, and many times on my, every week, I invite my community to do an intention for 3 people who have health challenges, who have written in. We have a thing called Intention of the Week. And we do that all the time. We've had some amazing successes. So we're intending all the time for people outside too. And our master class, we tell the groups, intend for people outside as well.
Okay. So that master class group, you're bringing people together and you're using the energy that they're generating, their intention to...
They're in different groups. They're in different groups, and they're intending for people inside their group and out.
Okay. Looking at questions here. Does sidereal time enhance the Power of 8? Does sidereal time? So I don't understand what sidereal.
Sidereal time.
Okay.
It is. I've covered that in some of the stuff that I've done. It's in my book, The Intention Experiment. It's too long to go into. Okay. There are optimum times and optimum places. I mention it in the Power of 8. I go into it in much more detail in the Intention Experiment. There are times when people's intentions work better than others in terms of what's going on with geomagnetic flux, believe it or not. Mm-hmm. And that has to do with what the sun's doing. So if that's something of interest to you, you can read all about it in the Intention Experiment.
Mm. Yeah, well, you know how you've talked, I don't know, was it the intention or the field? You talked about the random event generators.
Yeah, in the field, yeah.
They are one. I don't know whether you want to say anything about it. They're wonderful how you know, there's a measurement, you've got people measuring around the planet, and then there is like 9/11 or Princess Diana's funeral. Do you think we have an effect like that going on at the moment with COVID?
Well, I think so, and it'd be really interesting. I haven't spoken to Roger Nelson, who runs a thing called the Global Consciousness Project.
Mm-hmm.
There was a big study that was carried out with Princeton University, where they were looking at the effect of people sending intention to things called random event generators, which are essentially 20th century versions of a toss of a coin. There are electronic versions with random processes. So you get, let's say, they've attached it to images on a computer. So you get random flashing up of cowboys and random flashing up of Indians, and it goes back and forth. And because it's a random process, you will get about 50% of cowboys and 50% of Indians. But what they did was they sat people in front of them and had them send intention to those images to get more cowboys than Indians, or vice versa. And they found that when people sat in front of the computer and sent intention, they would have a small but significant effect in getting more cowboys, let's say, than Indians, if that's what they intended for, or the reverse. So Roger Nelson, working with them, got a big idea, and he wondered, well, what would happen if we have these random event generators going all the time around the world, and whenever there was some sort of situation where lots of people are thinking the same thought at the same time, some calamity or some joyous event, do the machines veer off their random courses? So he's been running since, I think the late 90s, he's been running a thing called the Global Consciousness Project, where he's got these things running all the time around the world, and he measures them against these big events. And he's found that the machines veered off their random course hugely during 9/11, right before the planes hit. Amazing. Funeral of Diana, death of JFK Jr., some of the they've had big effects with the election campaign of Obama and then Trump. And so there's been big effects just demonstrating group mind, oftentimes group horror. So it'd be very interesting to see. COVID-19 didn't have a single day as an event, but I will have to ask him to find out what's happened now. But it's very interesting and demonstrates a little bit of what I've been showing with our intention experiments, which is a psychic internet. We connect. We are part of a giant connection, and that our thoughts are not locked inside our skulls, but they're trespassers.
It's wonderful. It's just a wonderful way you put that. Quite a few questions here. Does the receiver need to know that they're being on the receiving end of an intention?
Yes, unless they're you not only need to know, they need to give you permission. The only time that would not be the case is if the person is unconscious or a baby, but I always suggest people seek permission.
Mm-hmm. And how many times does it need to be sent to get a result?
That is really, it's again, that's a long conversation. It really depends. I wouldn't obsess about it.
Okay. Have you done research with just one person sending the intention and not not in a group of 8?
We certainly have had many more effects. There's plenty of research on people sending intention, healers, et cetera, et cetera. There's no doubt that people have an effect. Certain people are more gifted than others. It's like playing the piano. But I was interested from the start in what happens when lots of people are sending intention at the same time. That's what, first got me to do the intention experiment. Does it magnify the effect?
Yeah.
And I'm not interested in individual stuff. I'm interested in community.
Yeah.
I'm interested in community.
Yeah. Question here, Cheryl, have you had experience of intentions for new social structures / economy / environment?
Well, remember the intention experiment is an experiment. So you've got to have something you can measure. You've got to have things that you can demonstrate are going to change. The ones we've done on environment, of course, have been lots of water experiments and remember I talked about the Lake Biwa experiment. I went through that very quickly, but it's Japan's largest and very polluted lake. And it is the lifeblood of water for a lot of the Japanese, and it's very polluted. So we took 2 samples of the water and we sent intention to one, left the other as a control, and we demonstrated that we moved it with just 10 minutes of intention, 1 whole pH towards an alkaline, which is more, it is less polluted then. It is fresher and cleaned up essentially. So we've done that. Of course, we've done certain things with seeds, trying to make them grow faster and making food more plentiful. Of course, we've tried to lower violence. We've done them we not only Sri Lanka and St. Louis, we did Washington, D.C., we did 2 provinces in lower Afghanistan, we did Yemen, we did Jerusalem, and we've done, we've done some extraordinary things it would seem, in lowering violence. Or, I mean, there's been temporal things that have happened right after that. For instance, with Sri Lanka, that was a 25-year intractable war. During our week of intention, usually with the peace ones, we do it for days. We do it for 10 minutes each day for, say, 7 or 8 days. And we found with Sri Lanka that very week of intention, the government, which had been losing the war, won a number of decisive battles that turned around the course of the war. The entire course of the war, within a few months, they had recaptured the whole north, which had been cut off, choked off by the rebels. And a few months after that, that 25-year war was finished. Now, did we do this? Lots of variables, but it has happened again and again and again. Afghanistan, lowest level of violence in the 2 hotbeds where the Taliban were after our intention, which was the 10th anniversary of 9/11. So we've done a lot of things like that. Again, you have to watch out with any environmental stuff. You got to make it specific. You can't just say, yeah, we want no more floods. We want world peace.
Yeah. I think what you're saying is find some way of measuring, and then you've got your feedback. If you can't measure, then you're just sending out your intention.
Yeah, and I mean, that's why I do it with scientists. I do it with scientists to legitimatize it.
Yeah, somebody's asked if you've worked with Emoto when you talk about him in the book. You have, haven't you?
Yeah, well, he invited me to do an intention experiment, but the actual scientist on it was a guy called Dr. Konstantin Korotkov, who is a noted Russian physicist, and has measured and done these kinds of intention things with me. By the way, just talking about these random event generators, Roger Nelson also, and Konstantin Korotkov, measured the effects on individuals of Power of 8 groups sending intention to them, and we found amazing changes in them almost immediately, lowering of stress and a variety of things.
Wow. And somebody's asked if you have somebody in the group who's a bit off, a bit grisly, negative, does it hold back the intention if one person is not switched on like the others are?
That's a big, long question. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff about, one negative person can, it's kind of a emotional ripple effect. Yeah. I wrote about that a lot in the bond. It can be, it depends, but, positivity can also prevail. But if you do have a very negative person and they're sabotaging the group, you can ask them to leave. Yeah. There are other ways. Again, I teach this in course about how to overcome negativity. It's a big, long question.
Somebody's asked if the healings are permanent.
Well, they have been for us.
Yeah. Have you worked with Joe Dispenza, Dan Winter?
Joe is my dear friend. I mean, really, really close friend of mine, as is Bruce Lipton and Greg Braden. We don't work together. We've spoken together many times. Most recently last summer, we've done, in fact, we're doing a conference. It was supposed to be a conference in Ottawa in June. It's now a virtual conference because of COVID-19. He's a dear friend, and we are in conversation all the time. But, you know, once again, he's got fantastic techniques. My techniques are slightly different. And I encourage people who, we have lots of crossover, people coming to either of our courses. And I recommend that people who have learned Joe's techniques is use it for his stuff and then use mine for mine, because we both know what works for us. Don't try to mash them together.
Yeah, yeah. I think that, you know, working together in community, there's a big attraction now. We're at home, connecting with others and using our energy in some way for good is a good use of us. And this is what the energy is for at this moment. That's why I think that the timing of our conversation is so great, and the means by which we can bring ourselves.
I mean, and I think one of the key elements of my work can be summarized in 3 words: get off of yourself. 4 words: get off of yourself. You know, it is about being part of a community, and so much of the self-help movement is all about that self, me. And I think we're moving into something really different. And I think one of the reasons that we've seen some of these extraordinary things going on in the Power of 8 groups is because people do get off of themselves, and they do sincerely intend for somebody else's well-being. And that is strengthening for everybody, every part of the group.
Somebody's asked about, have you tried running groups in energetic hotspots such as Glastonbury?
I have written about, as I say, it doesn't necessarily need to be a place like that. What is very interesting, though, is I've done a lot of work on places, on sacred spaces. And I do one retreat a year, and we started doing it 2 years ago. We started bringing people into churches to do intentions. Places where this is really taking from what Roger Nelson found, which is that there is a kind of a charge in some places, like the pyramids of Giza, sacred spaces. And so we've done them there. We've done them in, we were doing them in monasteries last summer. We were due to do one in an old monastery in Italy in the autumn. We've moved to that now because of COVID-19.
Yeah. Somebody's asked, as we have a powerful group now online, can we send a powerful intention that's really positive for the lockdown situation we're now in? Yes, is there any way we can use the energy of us being a group now, is a question.
Sure. Why not? Why not? But just be really specific.
Okay.
You know, when do you want it to end? What do you want to do?
Okay. When do we want it to end?
Yeah, when do we want it to end? How do we want it to end? You know, you have to be really specific, not just, let's end the lockdown now. Well, what does that mean?
And then what's the repercussion of that? Yes. It really is a good point about the specific, because you don't want to unlock something. You want to do it for the highest good and for the local good and for the specific good of the person or the thing you're intending for. So quite a lot of this really is gathering that specific request together, isn't it?
Yeah. It's telling the universe, tell the universe what you want. And again, you don't need to do all kinds of rituals at the end of it. You don't need to do, and so it is, and all of that stuff. You don't need to do that. You just need to get beyond yourself and into a group.
The question is, can we ask COVID-19 to evaporate?
Well, it isn't going to, is it?
Pardon?
It's not going to, is it? It's a virus. It's ever present. What you can ask is that your immune system is powerful enough to deal with it. You know, you can deal with it, or you can ask for the curve to be flattened by X%, which would it's what we've been doing. I mean, I do invite people to come on to my Facebook Live. And just, I'll be on today at 5 o'clock UK time. So that's 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 noon Eastern, 6 p.m. UK, Europe time. And I'll be on, I've been doing these intention experiments now. This will be my 7th week, intending for aspects of COVID. You know, we've done things about trying to lower fear. We've talked about flattening the curve. We had an intention for Boris Johnson when he was in intensive care. We've had a number of things. that that we be free of fear and completely trust in our immune systems and a variety of things like that. So we are continuing to do that.
I think something that's coming out from various comments here, it's not just the end of the lockdown and the virus not affecting people. Something has happened in the world to cause this global pause, stop. That's the gift. I mean, that isn't it? Is it what's the Chinese character called? Crisis actually is, it says opportunity in that character. So we do have an opportunity, and I think there are conversations, this kind of conversations that we have in Conscious Cafe, to think, what kind of world do we want to shift into? You know, if we've been given this gift, this blessing of the pause, how do we want it to be afterwards? And that's a whole series of conversations, isn't it, that gives all of us in Conscious Cafe food for thought for how we can.
Definitely. And the other part of that, definitely look upon this as an amazing opportunity. You know, my friend Irvin Laszlo, who is a wonderful futurist, wrote a paper and I got sent called Pandemic as Opportunity. And he was basically saying we're at a bifurcation, meaning we're at a fork in the road. And we can either go one way or go the other way. And the one way is going back to what we had. Now, if we look at the crises we've had in floods, fires, migrants, caused by all of the problems in the world, all caused by, you could say, our current way of life, that eclipses any death rate we've had from COVID-19, the worldwide death rate. So this does give us pause to start looking at, okay, how can we do better? And I invite everybody to look at what's happening underneath all of the daily statistics we have. I just wrote a blog about this. I'm fascinated by a major change in values that may be happening as a result. Now, just observe change in values, change in values that's going on. Observe what's going on with, for instance, the CEOs of many, many major corporations are doing what they did not do in 2008. Because, you know, 2008, everybody was talking about the world as we know it is going down. There's going to be this major shift, et cetera. And I didn't see too much evidence of that. What I saw was that the bankers carried on as before, and the world went back to sleep. And everybody was affluent and doing well, et cetera. And some of the people who weren't were doing really badly. And there was big, even more disparity between rich and poor. But we went back to sleep. And now what's gone on is really different. There's so many CEOs now who are taking a big pay cut, refusing their bonuses, handing that to their workers, or not taking any salary at all. Most of the airlines, they're not taking any salary at all. This is unheard of. This is not what the bankers did in 2008. Then you look at celebrities. You know, the celebrities, there was a scathing article in the Atlantic, American magazine, looking at some celebrities, you know, like Madonna, talking about how, you know, sitting there in her bathtub with her rose petals, giving us another chance to see her naked, and talking about how this is a great leveler because she's got dark roots, you know, and she's sitting there in her giant mansion. And then they had a bunch of celebrities do the song Imagine, each singing it, and each singing a part of it, singing things like Imagine There's No Possessions. And, you know, these are all people living in multi-million-dollar houses. And compare that, and people hated it. People were attacking it from all over. And in fact, the Atlantic Monthly said, you know, the days of celebrities telling us all what to do are probably over now. Now, compare that to what's gone on with Captain Tom.
Oh, it just is in my head to celebrate.
I know, Captain Tom. Oh. For anybody who doesn't know about this guy, he's 99, former Royal Air Force pilot, right? Who saw what was going on in the UK and the NHS they were worried about, and he says, okay, what can I do? Well, he had just had a hip replacement. So he said, okay, maybe if I walk, I'm going to be 100 at the end of April. Maybe if I walk 100 lengths of my garden, maybe I can raise 1,000 pounds or something.
100 pounds it started at.
100 pounds, right? So he thought that maybe I will raise 100 pounds, maybe 1,000 pounds. The guy has raised 28 million and counting, and walking along with this little walker. And he's done a song, You'll Never Walk Alone, with Michael Bull and the NHS choir in the background, which will reduce you to tears. And the guy, it's a #1. And the man is our national hero now here in the UK.
It's his birthday tomorrow, and the Royal Mint are doing I'm going to send a letter to my mum with the franking of the Royal Air Force fly past. I mean, there are so many heroes. It is, you're right with the shift of values, because, you know, low paid caring jobs, we just absolutely did not value in the caring sector or health. And now they are national heroes, and we're clapping on a Thursday night. I can't, well, who knows, but I can't see us going back to not valuing those jobs. We're now celebrating, you know, thanking the refuse collectors. We're really seeing all those parts of our economy. I mean, this is all the part that Rian Eisler talks about in her book about caring economics. You know, the word caring in front of economics, you change the game. You bring it in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, and some of the other things to talk about, you know, with this pause, you know, the atmosphere is healing itself. Pollution is healing itself. You know, the birds are coming out more. The animals are coming out more. You know, we're healing our earth, and that's an interesting one. You know, we walk. We're not. You know, we're near a very large common, almost like a forest. We're a block away, and for my exercise every day, I go there, and the air smells so fabulous. You know, here I am in London, and yet the air is so fabulous. And so I think that we're going to start looking at that too. So instead of fear and uncertainty, this is our opportunity to do it better.
Yeah. And getting together in groups to craft those intentions of what we want, because it's not just sitting together and having 10 minutes of thought go somewhere. What the key, what I'm hearing, is the specificity of something that you may or may not be able to measure, that we may not have the resources, but somebody could measure them. They are measurable in some way.
Don't worry about measuring it. Just measure about, I mean, that's what I do. You know, don't worry about measuring it, but worry about just being specific enough.
So it's lovely to see that virtually everybody has stayed with us for the course of our hour and a half. It's amazing. And I'm going to close by saying I have everybody's contact details. I'm going to make sure people have a link so they can review this again if they choose to. We've got a lot of resources. We're gathering together as Conscious Cafe communities. Anybody's not in that, contact me. I'll put your list of resources as well. I may not get that out today, but people know they can get to Lynne MacTaggart on Facebook for 5 o'clock today. Is that correct? Yeah,
Lynne MacTaggart 2011 is my official fan page. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. 2011. Okay, and that's for the 5 o'clock. So that's the immediate thing. But there are so many resources that you have, so we'll collate those. And I mean, I always find, if you know, when something happens, or when something happens with my health, I look to your source material, What Doctors Don't Tell You. What a treasure you are with all the work that you've done, you and Brian, over the years. And we've come to the end of our fantastic session. This is the beginning of a new story, Lynne. Thank you so much for your time today. And I think we can all wave our hands.
Bye, everybody. It's been a real pleasure, and good luck with your groups. They will be your connection, your salvation, and your inspiration in the coming months.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Thank you so much.
Goodbye, everybody. All around the world. Bye-bye. Everybody's saying they enjoyed it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so
Lynne,
much.
Bless you. Thank you, Lynne.